The United States Electoral College is the institution that elects the President and Vice President of the United States every 4 years. Citizens of the United States do not directly elect the President or the Vice President. Instead, they elect representatives called electors, who usually pledge to vote for particular presidential and vice presidential candidates. Electors are apportioned to each of the 50 states as well as to the District of Columbia. The number of electors in each state is equal to the number of members of Congress to which the state is entitled, while the 23rd Amendment grants the District of Columbia the same number of electors as the least populous state, currently 3. Therefore, there are currently 538 electors, corresponding to the 435 representatives and 100 senators, plus the 3 additional electors from the District of Columbia. The Constitution bars any federal official elected or appointed from being an elector, except for the electors in Maine and Nebraska. Electors are elected on a winner-take-all basis. That is, all electors pledge to the presidential candidate who wins the most votes in a state become electors for that state. Maine and Nebraska use the congressional district method, selecting one elector within each congressional district by popular vote and selecting the remaining 2 electors by a statewide popular vote. Although no elector is required by federal law to honor a pledge, there have been very few occasions when an elector voted contrary to a pledge. The 12th Amendment, in specifying how a president and vice president are elected, requires each elector to cast one vote for president and another vote for vice president. The candidate who receives an absolute majority of electoral votes for the office of president or of vice president is elected to that office. The 12th Amendment provides for what happens if the Electoral College fails to elect a president or vice president. If no candidate receives a majority for president, then the House of Representatives will select the president, with each state delegation having only one vote. If no candidate receives a majority for vice president, then the Senate will select the vice president, with each senator having one vote. On 4 occasions, most recently in 2000, the Electoral College system has resulted in the election of a candidate who did not receive the most popular votes in the election. Background: the Constitutional Convention in 1787 used the Virginia Plan as the basis for discussions, as the Virginia delegation had proposed it first. The Virginia Plan called for the Congress to elect the president. Delegates from a majority of states agreed to this mode of election. However, a committee formed to work out various details, including the mode of election of the president, recommended instead that the election be by a group of people apportioned among the states in the same numbers as the representatives in Congress, but chosen by each state in such manner as its legislature may direct. Committee member Governor Morris explained the reasons for the change. Among others, there were fears of intrigue if the president were chosen by a small group of men who met together regularly, as well as concerns for the independence of the president if he was elected by the Congress. Some delegates, including James Wilson and James Madison, preferred popular election of the executive. Madison acknowledged that while a popular vote would be ideal, it would be difficult to get consensus on the proposal given the prevalence of slavery in the South. There was one difficulty, however, of a serious nature attending an immediate choice by the people. The right of suffrage was much more diffusive in the northern than the southern states, and the latter could have no influence in the election on the score of Negroes. The substitution of electors obviated this difficulty and seemed on the whole to be liable to the fewest objections. The convention approved the committee's Electoral College proposal, with minor modifications, on September 6, 1787. Delegates from the small states generally favored the Electoral College out of concern that the large states would otherwise control presidential elections. In the Federalist Papers, James Madison explained his views on the selection of the President and the Constitution. In Federalist No. 39, Madison argued that the Constitution was designed to be a mixture of state-based and population-based government. Congress would have two houses, the state-based Senate and the population-based House of Representatives. Meanwhile, the President would be elected by a mixture of the two modes. Additionally, in the Federalist No. 10, James Madison argued against an interested and overbearing majority, and the mischiefs of faction in an electoral system. He defined a faction as a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion, or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. Republican government, with its varied distribution of voter rights and powers, would countervail against factions. Madison further postulated in the Federalist No. 10 that the greater the population and expanse of the republic, the more difficulty factions would face in organizing due to such issues as sectionalism. Although the United States Constitution refers to electors and electors, neither the phrase Electoral College nor any other name is used to describe the electors collectively. It was not until the early 19th century that the name Electoral College came into general usage as the collective designation for the electors, selected to cast votes for president and vice president. It was first written into federal law in 1845, and today the term appears in 3 U.S.C. Section 4, in the section heading and in the text as College of Electors. History. Original Plan Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution states, "Each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative, or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States, shall be appointed an elector." Article 2, Section 1, Clause 4 of the Constitution states, "The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors, and the day on which they shall give the votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States." Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3 of the Constitution provided for the original fashion by which the President and Vice President were to be chosen by the electors. In the original system, the candidate who received a majority of votes from the electors would become President. The candidate receiving the second most votes would become Vice President. The design of the Electoral College was based upon several assumptions and anticipations of the framers of the Constitution. Each state legislature would determine a system of allocating electors. First systems included legislatures, district plans, and direct popular voting. Each presidential elector would exercise independent judgment when voting. Candidates would not pair together on the same ticket with assumed placements toward each office of president and vice president. The system as designed would rarely produce a winner, thus sending the election to Congress. On these facts, some scholars have described the Electoral College as being intended to nominate candidates from which the Congress would then select a president and vice president. Each state government is free to have its own plan for selecting its electors, and the Constitution does not require states to popularly elect their electors. Several different methods for selecting electors are described at length below. Breakdown and revision. The emergence of political parties and nationally coordinated election campaigns soon complicated matters in the elections of 1796 and 1800. In 1796, Federalist Party candidate John Adams won the presidential election. Finishing in second place was Democratic-Republican Party candidate Thomas Jefferson. The Federalists' opponent became the vice president. This resulted in the president and vice president not being of the same political party. In 1800, the Democratic-Republican Party again nominated Jefferson for president, and also nominated Aaron Burr for vice president. After the election, Jefferson and Burr both obtained a majority of electoral votes but tied one another with 73 votes each. Since ballots did not distinguish between votes for president and votes for vice president, every ballot cast for Burr technically counted as a vote for him to become president, despite Jefferson clearly being his party's first choice. Lacking a clear winner by constitutional standards, the election had to be decided by the House of Representatives pursuant to the Constitution's contingency election provision. Having already lost the presidential contest, Federalist Party representatives in the lame duck House session seized upon the opportunity to embarrass their opposition and attempted to elect Burr over Jefferson. The House deadlocked for 35 ballots as neither candidate received the necessary majority vote of the state delegations in the House. Jefferson achieved electoral victory on the 36th ballot, but only after Federalist Party leader Alexander Hamilton, who disfavored Burr's personal character more than Jefferson's policies, had made known his preference for Jefferson. Responding to the problems from those elections, the Congress proposed the 12th Amendment in 1803, prescribing electors cast separate ballots for president and vice president, to replace the system outlined in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3. By June 1804, the states had ratified the amendment in time for the 1804 election. 14th Amendment. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment allows for a state's representation in the House of Representatives to be reduced to the extent that state unconstitutionally denies people the right to vote, including voting at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States. The only place in the Constitution mentioning electors being selected by popular vote. On May 8, 1866, during a debate on the 14th Amendment, Thaddeus Stevens, the leader of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, delivered a speech on the amendment's intent. Regarding Section 2, he said, "The second section I consider the most important in the article. It fixes the basis of representation in Congress. If any state shall exclude any of her adult male citizens from the elective franchise, or abridge the right, she shall forfeit her right to representation in the same proportion. The effect of this provision will be either to compel the states to grant universal suffrage or so share them of the power as to keep them forever in a hopeless minority in the national government, both legislative and executive. Federal law implements Section 2's mandate.